Think about the last time you broke a small rule. Maybe you jaywalked. Maybe you kept something you knew wasn't yours. Maybe you bent a policy at work because following it felt pointless. You didn't feel like a criminal. You felt like someone making a reasonable decision inside an unreasonable system. Now think about how many people made that same calculation today. Millions of small decisions. Millions of quiet exceptions. None of them dramatic. All of them adding up to something that doesn't have an obvious name, but that every functioning society depends on not happening. This video is about what occurs when the exceptions become the rule. Every society runs on an agreement that nobody signed. It isn't written in a single document. It isn't enforced by a single authority. It's something closer to a shared assumption that the rules apply to everyone, that following them comes with a return, and that the system, imperfect as it is at least trying to work for the people inside it. That assumption is the foundation, not the laws themselves, not the institutions, the belief that they mean something. Philosophers have different names for it. Rousseau called it the social contract. Durkheim called it social cohesion. But stripped of the academic language, it's simpler than that. It's the reason you stop at a red light at 3 a.m. when no one is watching, not because you fear the consequence, but because somewhere, beneath the habit, there's a residual trust that the system is worth maintaining. That trust is not infinite. It's not a given. It's not a law of nature. It's something that gets built slowly over generations, and something that can erode faster than anyone expects once people stop believing the agreement is being honored on the other side. So what happens when the other side stops honoring it? Not dramatically, not with an announcement, just quietly stops delivering what the agreement implied. In 2024, only 23% of Americans said they trusted the federal government, not disagreed with it, not criticized it, didn't trust it. 66% believed it was outright incompetent. And this isn't just an American phenomenon. Globally, 61% of people reported feeling a moderate or high level of resentment, defined specifically as the belief that governments and corporations make their lives harder while serving someone else's interests. Not apathy, resentment. There's a difference. Apathy is when you stop caring. Resentment is when you still care, but what you feel has curdled into something else entirely. And here's where it becomes relevant to how people actually behave. When institutions lose legitimacy, people don't suddenly become lawless. They become selective. They decide quietly and individually which rules still make sense and which ones no longer deserve their compliance. That calculation is happening right now, in millions of households, in millions of daily decisions, most of them invisible, all of them consequential. It rarely starts with something dramatic. It starts with a shortcut that feels justified. The tax form you filled out slightly in your favor because you watched the people above you use accountants to pay nothing at all. The sick day you took when you weren't sick because the company took something from you that it never gave back. The rule you ignored because everyone around you ignored it and nothing happened. Psychologists call this ethical fading, the moment when a behavior that would once have felt wrong stops registering as a moral question at all. It just becomes what people do. And the mechanism is consistent across cultures, across income levels, across every demographic you can measure. People don't abandon their ethics all at once. They adjust them incrementally in response to what they see the system rewarding and punishing. When the system punishes honesty and rewards evasion, people learn. When the people at the top operate by a different set of rules and face no consequence, people notice. They don't announce what they've concluded. They just start making different decisions. And at a certain point, those different decisions stop feeling like exceptions. They start feeling like the only rational response to an irrational arrangement. There's a specific moment in a society's erosion that's worth paying attention to. It's not when corruption begins, it's when corruption stops being news. When a politician is caught and the response is a shrug. When a corporation is fined for behavior that harmed millions and the fine is smaller than the profit the behavior generated. When the headline appears, stays for a day, and disappears without changing anything. That's not cynicism, that's pattern recognition. People learn very quickly when accountability is theater, when the investigation leads nowhere, when the resignation comes with a pension, when the apology is followed by the exact same behavior with slightly different language. And what that teaches, at a mass scale, absorbed by millions of people watching the same cycles repeat, is that the rules are not actually universal, that there is one system for the people who built it and another for everyone inside it. Once that belief takes hold, and the data suggests it already has, the social contract doesn't break. It doesn't need to. It just becomes something people reference less and less. Like a document everyone knows exists, but nobody reads anymore because they've already learned that it doesn't quite apply to them. Here's what makes this particularly hard to reverse. Trust doesn't erode in isolation. It erodes socially. When you stop trusting the system, you also start watching what the people around you do. And when enough people have quietly made the same calculation, their behavior becomes the new reference point. Not the rules, the behavior. Sociologists call this a norm cascade. The moment when a behavior that was once seen as deviant becomes statistically common enough to feel normal. And once it feels normal, the people who were still complying start to feel like the ones making the irrational choice. You see it in the small things first. The neighborhood that stops reporting crimes because nothing comes of it. The workplace where everyone takes a little more than they should because everyone else does. The community where maintaining shared spaces quietly becomes someone else's problem until it's no one's problem, until the spaces stop being maintained. And here's what the research shows. 4 in 10 people globally would now support at least one form of hostile activism to force change, including damage to public or private property. Among people aged 18 to 34, that number rises to 53%, more than half. Not fringe, not extreme, majority. This isn't an argument for or against that. It's an observation about where things stand when half of the next generation has concluded that working within the system is no longer a viable option. There's a point in the erosion that's harder to see than the others. It's not when people get angry. Anger is still a form of engagement. Anger means you believe something could be different. The more advanced stage is quieter. It's detachment. Psychologists have documented what happens when someone is exposed long enough to conditions they can't influence. The brain adjusts its expectations, not as a choice, as a protection. If effort consistently produces nothing, the mind stops generating effort. It learns that trying is a cost without a return. And once that pattern is learned deeply enough, even when conditions change, even when the door opens, the instinct to walk through it is no longer there. That's what prolonged institutional failure does to the people living inside it. It doesn't just produce frustration, it produces a specific kind of exhaustion, the kind that looks like apathy from the outside, but feels like something more honest from the inside. Not indifference, conclusion. The conclusion that participation costs something real and returns nothing reliable. And once that conclusion spreads, once it stops being the minority view and starts being the obvious one, the system doesn't collapse loudly. It just becomes increasingly expensive to maintain. because the people who were holding it together quietly decided they had other things to do. So here's the question nobody asks cleanly. When a system stops delivering what it promised, is following its rules still a virtue? Or is it just a habit that benefits the people who designed the rules? There's a version of social stability that isn't health. It's the stability of people who have been exhausted into compliance, who follow the rules not because they believe in them, but because challenging them feels like more than they have left to give. That kind of stability is fragile in a way that doesn't show until it breaks. And here's what's worth considering. The people who built these systems understood something important, that the rules only hold as long as enough people believe they apply to everyone equally. The moment that belief cracks, the rules don't disappear. They just start meaning different things to different people. Which is exactly where we are. Not in collapse, not in revolution, in something quieter and harder to name. A society where the formal rules still exist, but the shared belief beneath them is running thinner every year. Where the contract is still technically in place, but fewer and fewer people feel bound by something that stopped feeling mutual a long time ago. Calling that normal doesn't make it stable, it just makes it invisible. Maybe the saddest part isn't the corruption or the inequality or even the collapse of trust. It's what happens after. When a shared arrangement stops working, people don't usually fight it. They quietly reorient. The neighborhood matters less than the house. The institution matters less than the person standing next to you. The future of the system becomes someone else's problem, because you have enough problems of your own. And individually, that's understandable. When something has failed you enough times, withdrawing isn't weakness, it's experience. But here's what makes it a tragedy rather than just a strategy. The systems that were already failing needed participation to survive. And the more people withdrew, the less worth participating in those systems became, until the withdrawal itself became the evidence that withdrawal was correct. Nobody decided this. Nobody sat down and chose a society where everyone looks out for themselves because looking out for anything larger stopped feeling like a reasonable investment. It just became the world that was left after enough people, each making a perfectly rational decision, arrived at the same place at the same time. That's how it usually goes. Not with a collapse, with a quiet settling into something smaller than what could have been. If something in this felt familiar, not as a theory, but as something you've watched happen around you, you've probably already know someone who's been feeling the same weight without quite knowing where it comes from. Send it to them. And if you want to keep looking at the things that are easier to accept than to understand, we'll be here.